of giving students a checkpoint for their presentations. So they do record the presentations as a work in progress and then collectively give feedback, and he's seen noticeable improvement in their final presentation about their capstone project, the final point in time for that degree. It's very interesting in terms of the approach. Another sort of similar aside to this, we had a guest lecturer earlier this year from Leicester University, and she was describing how some of her academic staff were using this idea of podcasting, or more correctly, just recording an audio file. So they would sit there with their students' exams or their large assignments, and as they're flicking through, students, this is a paper about blah, 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 the first paragraph, and so recording their feedback rather than handwriting it. She said, because one, the intonation, the power of her voice to express certain emphasis, you can't do so easily with written text. She was saying some of the feedback there was very interesting in that process. And she had some of the lecturers also report that they could do this process more quickly in this way. And also they had that file there. As someone pointed out to me, what if I have to have the same statement over and over, 300 essays, you haven't done this. So maybe a lot of the audio files, there's what they call macros. So you can say one or two words and then it will repeat this sort of standard phrase. Not suggesting this should be personalized, but you get my point. Any other essential?
Battery life.
True. Must last as long as the task takes, if not longer.
And was that compatibility that you were?
Compatibility, like you said, Android, you'll be Apple fan.
Yeah.
PolyU, Apple advocates.
Yes. Maybe.
Affordability.
Yes. That's a good point.
Do your students have them? Or
so
if students don't have them?
Access, yeah. It's like if you're suddenly using a mobile learning scenario for your students and a third or two-thirds, like representative here, don't have the device or a device that can do this functionality, are you disadvantaging the other people? What often happens in mobile learning in these sort of scenarios now, and this sort of overlaps into the next part where we're looking at some teaching and learning possibilities, are these sort of questions. And for some of it is about economies of scale. Today, I will give away an iPad box. Okay? So in that pause, whose heart went, me, I will answer the question, who really would like one of these if possible? And maybe the other way around, who doesn't want one if it was free, here now? Who really doesn't want one? No, as you can say, I don't mind at all. But think about this, for most people, if this was maybe another device that was suitable or useful for them, not necessarily an iPad, they'd probably say yes. So economies of scale. If I, for example, instead of giving this to one person here, if I could give this to ELC as a department, everybody had one. If I could give this to say ELC, all faculty, all students, how would this change the nature of language learning in the faculty, in your department? If they, for example, gave one to every PolyU student and every PolyU staff member, how would this change? Some universities are doing this in the States.
CityU.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I was going to bring up CityU, but sort of just up the road. Maybe too competitive. But yeah, they do give new students not a good laptop, a netbook, but enough to do some typing, access the internet. It's interesting, I think MIT did a study, it was Berkeley, did a study to sort of say, when you're choosing your degree, do you base some of your choice on these sort of considerations? If we were to give every student at MIT as part of their enrollment package, an iPod, an iPhone, or an iPad, or Android, or whatever device to help their learning, and vast majority said yes. Okay, so they're aware that also their presence in iTunes, what they found was they set it up as a thing fit for purpose in their university, but it's now very, very broadly accessed, very broad. So it comes down to these sort of considerations. Part of the question is, as we move from, I suppose, old school book learning, okay, to maybe new school book learning, there's questions about how this sort of evolves. And sure, this is a bit of a joke, And yes, log on, you can buy this. Very cool. So there's almost like, the reason I did this is to sort of also get a reaction, because it's sort of like one of the beginning slides, jumping on the pad wagon I used. So it's a case of, depending on fit for purpose and ultimately the structures we have in place, this is where some language learning possibilities, I think, really open up in terms of mobile affordances. So I mentioned iTunes. Who here has listened to a podcast, an audio file? Oh, that's pleasantly surprising. I've asked this in other forums, but you're probably a little biased in terms of the area you're teaching in. Similar, ask your students this question. Ask your students if they've posted a video on YouTube or written something into a blog. So this also talks about change of behavior, new syntax. But definitely in terms of the use of podcasting for language learning, there's more literature than I could ever cover today that supports this, the power of this as a process. But it is sort of fit for purpose too, and having the resources to do it effectively. In particular, from a very pragmatic point of view, 3 universities got together and say, look, all staff have a phone, have a mobile device. How can we make our systems help with this? In other words, they're looking at productivity sort of issues, efficiencies, and setting in place things to make it a bit more seamless for their staff. So they set up this mobile staff productivity project, looking at very straightforward things, timetabling, exam sort of results, logistics basically, not so much as a teaching and learning endeavour. And then there's, I suppose, some of these notions of things that have even been developed at PolyU. This is a mobile glossary developed about 2 years ago now for nursing, I believe. No, it's for ITC, sorry, ITC. But similarly, we've actually done more recently one for nursing in terms of understanding of vocabulary. And so maybe instead of having a whole class teaching event, some of these affordances are a bit more sporadic. And by that I mean students are starting to use the devices to support their learning irrespective of what we do from a teaching perspective. If we're looking at this notion of change of learning, moving from the book to a different sort of area, there's this notion of ubiquity often comes up. Similar to the points you were sort of making about access, even battery life, always connected, and so on and so on. I think we're very lucky in Hong Kong in this regard, in terms of the infrastructure we have. My iPad is a phone one as well, but I think I've connected through the phone part of it one time in the few months that I've had it. And that is because if you walk around, the Wi-Fi connection is so prevalent. The universities through PCCW, that connection. So it's some of these affordances of being able to look up anything at any time. Think about it. You could give me a word to define, and within, on average, if the connection's good, about a minute, I could have that definition for you. I was, in the past, played a game, say, you give me any question and I'll find the answer within less than 5 minutes. But then someone, usually probably one of you two, will probably ask me the meaning of love, the meaning of life. So it's not so much what you're doing in terms of some of the questions, but more they're fit for purpose in terms of your learning structure. If it's very one-off, very sporadic, our job, I think, is to help students make some of these connections, the deep learning rather than just the answer the question superficially. I mean, there's cautions, and this is an aside from mobile learning as a topic in Wikipedia as the only source of reference our students will use. So in terms of then, as we're progressing this conversation about learning possibilities, this is similar to maybe what some people have identified as they're desirable in terms of mobile learning. In terms of then specific, my view on things to do with language learning is the notion of the electronic textbook. I know personally when I was a student some of the textbooks were expensive and heavy. let alone the physical space PolyU has to have to store them. You walk around and see all the lockers row upon row. There's definitely a lot of literature now that is talking about a change of the nature of publishing. Think, for example, about music. In the past, I bought a disc, a large record. Then I bought a CD. Now I would probably go to iTunes and choose the songs I want for my purpose there. In publishing, I buy the textbook, the whole thing usually. But now, maybe in terms of this sort of model, I would go through a large publishing house and say, look, for language learning, about these topic areas, I will choose a chapter from that book, a chapter from this book, a chapter from that book. And it's sort of similar to this iTunes model. This, I think, maybe is coming if the publishing companies can sort through the rights, responsibilities, copyright sort of issues, similar to what iTunes have done. And similar, though, I will still buy a CD, but for some reason. Maybe the audio is better quality for some. But as the bandwidth increases, these sort of things are changing. So I suggest that in terms of what would be on your radar as a centre, this notion of e-textbooks. Certainly, someone from the library told me the other day, over 70% of their resources are digital now. And similar, 70% of their budget. Then there's the notion of we spend a lot of money on a fixed computer lab. If we take that same chunk of money and gave everybody a portable device, even a netbook, I haven't done the budget, but yeah, that'd be close. Yeah. So then the computer lab becomes wherever a group of people are sitting, like Andy's slide from the past. You know, the classroom becomes a little unstructured maybe at certain points in time, or like this for other points in time, depending on what's happening. In particular, it's interesting, podcasting's been around for a reasonable amount of time, but hasn't really taken off to the degree that I thought it would, for various reasons, I think, beyond probably what we can talk about. But I think still, some language learning centres in the research I did preparing for today, get the students to prepare audio files is probably more accurate, or audio and video files to do similar to what you were describing. In terms of this sort of capturing a presentation and looking at it again and saying, look, this wasn't clear, this needs more emphasis, and so on. Then, like I mentioned, there's this notion of being linked anywhere, anytime. One university is letting students bring their laptop to the final exam. So it's like an open book exam, just the book is very large. So then the questions that are asked in that exam become far more important. Okay, far more deeper, I think. And equally as much as an assumption, students have the skill set to sort through that open book very efficiently. And this is information literacy as an idea. And then there's definitely new ways to create content, well beyond note-taking as what I used to do in class. I know of PolyU students who would sit in the class and record your lecture, probably without your permission, as an audio file. Because then they can go back and listen to it again and again and again. Where this becomes, I think, even more interesting is maybe where they post that somewhere, and collectively as a class, maybe they comment on different things. Maybe you are able to look at those comments and can identify, look, they really don't understand that point. I need to re-look at this again. So, in terms of one framework I suggest is useful to consider exploring mobile learning, that is sort of a bit device neutral, even almost a number of devices neutral. Across these 4 areas, and these are clarified in more detail on page 17 of your booklet. So I'll just give you a moment to look over the descriptions of these in the resource booklet I've provided, and unfortunately I could ask you to share. And then I have one final small video to share with you, and then I'll leave you to your lunch.